Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on the 2014 Opel Corsa D with the 1.4 liter engine. And today we will be changing the drive belt and the drive belt tensioner and pulley. And as always, I will be showing you the entire process with as much detail as possible. Now at the time of filming, the car is nearly 9 years old and has done about 120,000 kilometers. And the reason I brought that up is because on the Haynes manual that we use with the Opel, it says that every 100,000 miles, that is 160,000 kilometers or 6 years, whichever comes first, we should renew the auxiliary drive belt. Now, we don't have the miles, but we definitely have the years. We're about 3 years past the limit. And I know that the belt that's currently on the car is the original one, so it's due changing. And also, given the age and as preventative maintenance, it also makes sense, given that we're removing so many components to access the belt itself, to also change the tensioner and pulley. And with that said, let's get to work. And we start with the location of the belt, which is towards the right-hand side of the engine as you're looking forward, or to the left-hand side of the engine as you're looking towards the back of the car. Namely, in this area around here. I think you can barely behind there see one of the pulleys on the belt circuit, which means that first things first, we need to remove the front right wheel. Now, don't mind the rust on the disc. The car's been sitting for a few weeks, and here it's about December at the time of filming, and we've had a bit of snow, a bit of rain, so a lot of humidity that caused this rust, but it'll clear out as soon as we take the car out for a spin. Now the wheel is held in place with 4 17mm hex bolts, which I will now remove. A breaker bar should work fine, though in my case I'm gonna use an impact gun. And out comes the wheel. As a quick side note, don't forget to have the car properly secure when you remove the wheel. As you can see, I've used the car jack as well as a 3-ton jack stand. No point in taking any unnecessary risks. And going back to the car, the area that's going to be of interest to us is behind this plastic cover. Now, in order to remove this cover, first we need to start with this plastic clip over here, which has a pin in the center that needs to be pushed, like so. And then using a clip removal tool, which you need to shove beneath the plastic clip, you pull it out. And this is how it looks like, okay? If it came out intact, it can be reused. Just make sure you don't lose the pin. Next, there are 2 Torx T25 bolts, one over here and the other one over here, that need to be removed. But because this area is prone to a lot of dust, it's recommended that you first clean them a little. Not for the sake of aesthetics, but because they can get dirt inside their holes, and if that happens, you can't really push the Torx tip too much inside, and if you then start spinning, you may actually strip the inside of the bolt before you remove it, and that's going to cause headaches. Let's remove them. They don't take a lot of torque to remove. Okay, and they look like this. Try not to lose them, hold on to them. The second one. Okay, it came out as well. And if you now try to move it, you'll feel that it's still held in place somewhere. And that somewhere is actually underneath the front bumper, namely right here. Same bolt, same procedure. And after I remove the third one, there's one more to remove, which you can barely see here where I'm pointing my finger, which is normally easy to remove. However, on my Opel I also have a metal shield that goes right on top of that bolt, so I need to first slacken off the shield and then I can take the bolt out. Now before I remove that fourth bolt or screw, I put this one back in just to keep the plastic mask in place. And now as I remove it, doing my best not to lose it. Okay. With a little bit of effort, the cover came out. Now once the cover is off, you can also just perform an inspection of the components to see if they really do need changing. And what the Haynes manual says you need to do is you need to spin the belt along its entire circuit and bit by bit just take a look to see if there are any marks of cracks or glazing, i.e. shiny points, or any other abnormalities. Now, it's usually a good idea if you're spinning the engine by hand to always do it in the normal direction of rotation for that engine. In this case, that is clockwise, but if you're ever in doubt, just start the engine for a couple of seconds and note the direction of rotation, which is what I'm going to do now just to show you. So, as I said, the direction is clockwise. So, if at this point all that you wanted to do would be to inspect the state of the belt, you would need an E18 head, which matches against the crankshaft pulley bolt right here. A ratchet, you don't need anything bigger than this, as you're about to see. And then what you need to do is, as I explained, bit by bit, spin the engine, take a flashlight, take a look at the bit of the belt you can see here, and repeat the procedure for as much as necessary. Now, in our case, we won't inspect it like so, because we're going to remove it anyways. I'm going to do a quick inspection once all the components are out. So let's continue. Back to the engine bay. In order to access the belt that's down there, we're going to start by first removing the entire engine air filter box over here. And we start by slacking off this ring, or whatchamacallit, I don't recall how it's called in English. I hope you'll forgive me. And for that, you need a 7mm hex. Okay. After which, you can pull the filtered air intake, which is this part here. No need to disconnect the sensor from here. Here it is. Hope you can see it. Now, before doing anything else, make sure that the intake here is fully covered, because this is where filtered air goes directly inside the engine, and you definitely don't want any kind of contaminants, I don't know, dust, leaves, rocks, whatever, getting in there, because you risk damaging the engine. So I'm using a plastic bag and the rag as well to make sure the air intake is properly covered. Next, you see the wiring harness for the sensor is held in place on the air filter box in 2 points, one here, one here. Now, if you have replacements for these types of clips, just cut them out. Unfortunately, I don't, so I'm gonna use a pair of pliers like this to try and grab them from underneath, and with a little bit of patience, pull them out in one go. And I'll do that off camera. And that had partial success. This one I managed to remove intact. This one, not so much. See, one of the legs is broken, but I put it back for testing and it still holds. So I'm gonna leave them as they are for now. Just tuck the cable a little bit to the side to make room. And then the box itself is not held against the body of the car with bolts. Instead, it's held in place with, hopefully you can see them, 1, 2 over there and one underneath, 3 rubber mountings. So it should come out with a little bit of jiggling. That was the bottom one. There we go. Okay, here's the box out. And you also need to disconnect it from here. This actually connects to the air intake at the front of the car, like so. And now you can see the mounting points for the box a bit better. So there's one down there, second there, and third here. And this is the tube that feeds air from the outside directly to the air filter box. Now with the air box out, I went the extra mile and actually zip tied this thing together, make sure I don't have any issues. And now we can see the belt and various pulleys a bit better. And you can also see now why this job is a bit more difficult than other similar jobs from other cars, like the Sportage. You see the bracket that connects the engine to the right hand side engine mount goes directly inside the belt circuit. Okay, so here's the belt outside and you see the bracket in. And if you now take a look from the bottom, looking at the way the belt goes, here is the bracket over here. And it's pretty clear that you cannot physically remove the belt from the car without taking off the bracket. Unless you cut the belt, obviously, but that will definitely not be helpful when you try to install the new one. So in effect, the right hand side engine mount and this bracket need to come out. And here is our engine mounting and part of the bracket down there. And you see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bolts that we need to remove. And let's think about it for a second. If we remove these 2 without doing anything else, what's going to happen is our beloved engine is just going to crash to the floor, because these bolts actually hold the engine up, connected to the bracket. Whereas if we remove these 3 bolts here, nothing's going to happen because the engine mount itself is sitting with all its weight on the chassis of the car. So we are going to start by removing these 3 bolts. But now before we start removing bolts, I'm going to do what I did when I changed the gearbox. Namely, I'm going to number each of the bolts and their corresponding insertion holes. And this is going to help us install each bolt back into its original position and not risk installing the bolts in the wrong way around. So take a look here. This is 1, and hopefully you can see it. There's also a small 1 scratched over there. This is 4 with 4, 5 with 5, and here we have 2 with 2 and 3 with 3. And now we can remove the first 3 bolts. That's 1. That is 2. And here is number 3 as well. Now obviously you don't need an impact gun for this. You can just use a breaker bar, the ratchet and so on. But obviously the impact gun does speed things up considerably. And let me see if I can show you the numbering. Okay, this is bolt number 1, the one from that side. This is bolt number 2, and this is bolt number 3. Now I'm gonna leave number 1 in place, tightened a bit by hand. And the next thing, we'll have to start raising the engine in this side. Now with respect to jacking up the engine block, I'm using the same solution that I did when I had to change the gearbox. Namely, I used a scissor jack. In particular, this is the scissor jack from the Range Rover, because its top surface mates quite well with the bottom of the engine block. And one additional advantage is once the engine block will be raised, it will also become tilted, which can be a problem, for example, if you want to use bottle jacks. Okay, the tilt will reduce the contact surface between the engine block and the bottle jack, and then there is the big risk of the bottle jack actually slipping and the engine block falling. So definitely don't recommend using bottle jacks for this. A scissor jack should work just fine. Again, the load on it is pretty low. This is, I don't know, a couple of 100 kilos at most, and these jacks can take at least 2 tons. And now I'm going to raise the block a little bit, and then I'm gonna go and remove the bolt that I left inside the engine mount for safety. Like so. And as you can see, the engine mount is now completely lifted above the chassis. So right now the entire weight of the engine block sits on the jack, which means now it's safe to remove these 2 bolts as well. And for that, you're gonna need a Torx E18. That's 1. Don't lose the washer. And for the second bolt, I needed an extension. And out it comes as well. And with it, we can remove the engine mount. And since we just removed it, we can now take the opportunity to actually study the engine mount in detail. Make sure that it's still good. In our case it is. See, there are no cracks on the rubber or anything apart from the surface rust. So this is good to put back, but obviously in your case, if you were to find cracked rubber or signs of wear, now would be a good opportunity to replace this one. Getting back to the car, let's make an observation. At this point, it is possible to remove the belt and install it back without having to remove this additional bracket. However, in order to do that, you need to slack the tensioner here on this Torx bolt over here, and for that you would need a very thin wrench, because you have only this much clearance. Okay, so if you're trying to use a normal hex bit and a ratchet, it may not fit. However, because we don't have any thin Torx wrench, we will have to remove this bracket as well. And in any case, this also needs to come out if you want to replace the tensioner, which we do want to do. Now this bracket is held in place with 3 bolts. One you can barely see over there. The second one is over here, and the third one is right over there. And in order to access the topmost bolts, we need to use our jack and raise the engine block further. So I raised up the block just enough to gain access to the first bolt over there, which I'm going to remove with this ratchet, because my impact tool doesn't really fit. Let's see if I can crack it open. Yeah, it's coming out. Here's the bolt removed. Take note of its length. The other two are similarly long, and that further complicates the removal of this bracket. But anyways, as you can see, I've marked them down as well. This is 6 with 6, 7 with 7, and 8 with 8 down there. As for the second bolt down there, it's extremely difficult, if not downright impossible, to raise the engine enough to clear past this part of the chassis if you want to remove the bolt using a Torx bit and a ratchet, like a bigger ratchet, the one similar to the one I used on the left side. And another solution, you can use a thin wrench or ratchet. If you don't have a Torx wrench thin enough, what you can do, and what seems to work very well, is you can use a size 11, okay, 12-point head, which mates perfectly to the Torx T14. And this is what I'm going to use to remove the second bolt. And here I am from underneath the car. Really not that much space. And with a little bit of struggle, I did manage to yank it loose. There's the bolt partially removed. I can reach it. And I've ran into a new problem as I'm raising the engine to get clearance for that annoying bolt. This intake tube is starting to hit the top of this plastic cover. And because I don't want to remove all this, I have to temporarily remove this tube, which is held in place with a Jubilee clip with a 7mm hex head, just like the one that connects the tube to the air filter box. And after we remove the Jubilee clip and pull on the tube, again, be aware that this is the intake that goes directly into the cylinders, so cover up that intake and the tube as well immediately after you remove them. And here's a nice look at the throttle body just before I cover it. I'll put a plastic bag here and the glove to go with that, plus another glove over the other end of the tube. And I've put the tube to the side, and now I have sufficient clearance here to raise the engine and remove the bolt. And now I was able to raise the engine to a sufficient height. As you can see, no more problems there. I had to again remove the engine mount because it kept hitting on this air conditioning pipe. And now, after more than an hour of struggle, I'm able to take this second bolt out, which is number 7. Hooray! And now for the third bolt, which is all the way down there, we pretty much need to do the opposite, and that we need to lower the engine as much as possible in order to gain access. And here it is lowered, and you'll notice one thing: you can't really lower it too much because the bracket is simply gonna hit the chassis once you lower it beneath a point. Which I guess is also a good thing, because it kind of means that if the jack fails or it slips or something, the engine won't really fall out of the car. It'll just hit this point and get stuck here. And now the lower bolt is much more accessible, and we can proceed to slacken it off. And here's the bolt disconnected, but again, you can't really remove it because of the chassis. However, in this case, thankfully, it's a lot easier, simply because with the removal of the third bolt, the bracket has much more play, and that allows us to simply lower the jack further. And as you can see, we are able to lower it past the chassis point and little bit more, remove it with much more ease. Awesome. And the bracket is now free from its bolts, and we need to take it out. For that, we need to raise the engine block again. And from this point on, be extremely careful, because there are no more protective components around this area. So if the jack fails, the engine's gonna fall right down. Okay, so pay attention from this point on. And I did need to raise the engine by a good amount. As a reference, you want to raise it to the point where this line is roughly parallel to this one, approximately. And then you pull the bracket towards you, and with a little bit of jiggling, it comes right out. Okay. Now we have full access to all of the components. I'm gonna lower the engine a little bit just to ease up the stress on all the pipes and cables, because it is a little bit high. And here are all the pulleys and the belt completely accessible. There's no problem with the water pump, but if, for example, you needed to change the pump or the pump pulley or whatever, these are the steps that you need to go through in order to access it. If you are to remove it, you know, just remove the bolts, remove the belt, etc. But more importantly, this is the main reason why we needed to take the bracket out. Okay, to remove the tensioner, we have a bolt down there and the bolt here, and whereas the one down there was accessible with the bracket on, this one was not, so we couldn't remove it unless we removed the bracket beforehand. Okay, now let's take the belt out. Now, before the actual removal, it's a really good idea when dealing with dry belts to take a note of the entire circuit of the belt and its direction of rotation, in case the belt has a certain direction of rotation. And here's what we have for this particular engine, which is the A14XER 1.4 liter. This is the water pump pulley at the very top, i.e. this one over here, the black one. Alternator pulley is the one you see over there. Air conditioning compressor pulley is the one over there. Crankshaft pulley, well, it's pretty obvious really, is the one over here. And the last one is the tensioner pulley that's over there on top. And this is the way the belt is supposed to go. So keep this in mind, because it's going to be very helpful when you need to put the new belt in its correct position upon installation. And to remove the belt, we need to slacken the tension on the tensioner. And for that, we need the same Torx E14 that we used on the bracket bolts. And we need to connect it to the pulley bolt over there. Clean up the area beforehand if you need to. And you need to pull clockwise to slacken the tension on the belt. Just take the belt out. Hooray! Time to go and eat a cookie. And let us now finally compare the old belt with the new one. Looking at the indications, it's made by Quantitech in Romania, which makes me very happy. It's made out of EPDM, and its code is 5PK1334. Now 5PK1334 simply means that the length of the belt is 1334 millimeters. PK indicates that this is an automotive belt, and 5 simply means that it has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 grooves or channels. And our replacement belt is also made by Continental, same size, 5PK1334, again made in Romania, which again makes me very happy. Now when I changed the drive belt on the Sportage, I talked a bit about the wear pattern on these types of belts, and I'll make the same observations here, so you have all the information in one video. The idea is this: belts used to be made out of neoprene, and the neoprene belts, when they get old, they start to show cracks, start to lose chunks out of the grooves, and so on. Whereas those made of EPDM usually don't show cracks, and they tend to have a wear pattern similar to tires, in that what actually happens is the channels simply thin out from wear. Like here, if you take a look, you should be able to see that the channels on the new belt, the one down here, are thicker than the ones in the old belt, okay? And the risk is that once the channels become too thin, the belt is gonna start to slip. Slippage creates heat, and once the belt heats past a certain point, it will lose its cohesion and tear itself apart. In our particular case, this belt still had some life left in it, but as I explained at the beginning, I'm doing this as part of the recommended maintenance schedule from the Haynes manual. And finally, to remove the tensioner, as I said, there are two bolts. E14, same as the previous ones, the one at the top. Just gonna leave it in there for now so I can remove the other one without the part falling. And in order to access that bolt over there, I need to again lower the engine block. And for this lower bolt, you need a Torx E12. Bolt is smaller. And out it came. And finally, again, I raised the engine block a bit to make room for this bolt. I've slackened it off sufficiently so I can remove it by hand. It has to be very long. And out comes the tensioner. Before we proceed with installing the new tensioner, let us compare it against the old one. So here is the old one. Apart from some minor signs of rust on the coil here, which isn't really a cause for concern, take a look at the pulley and the fact that this area is pretty dirty, which tends to indicate that the grease inside the bearing that holds the pulley may have come out. Okay. And this also seems to be confirmed by the fact that the pulley spins very easily. See? And there's also a little bit of noise. And there's medium amount of play. Compare this against the new part, where it is more difficult to spin. See? It stops quite quickly. Okay. There is a very, very small amount of play. That's normal even on new bearings. And let's do a side-by-side comparison. You can see that they look absolutely identical. More so, they are made by the same manufacturer, Litens or Litens, not sure what the correct pronunciation is. The only difference is this was an original GM product, where on this one it just says Germany. So this is made in Germany, which should be a good indicator of quality. And one more interesting detail, the new part that I just shown comes from INA. So I ordered an INA part and I got one that says Litens on it. And this is similar to what happened with the Sportage, where I got a Gates tensioner in an INA box, if memory serves me correctly. But given that all these brands are known for their quality, I have no reasons for concern. So given the state of the old tensioner and the grease that came out and the ease with which it spins, it is a very good thing that we went through all the hassle to have it removed. And with that said, let us begin the installation process of the new components. Oh, and before doing anything with regards to installation, it's a good idea to simply inspect the state of all these pulleys around here. So let's see, the water pump pulley spins normally. Minor play. No indications that it needs to be replaced. Alternator pulley spins normally, no noise, no play at all. Air compressor pulley spins again normally with no play, and crankshaft pulley as well is in order. And I'm gonna spend a bit of time with a bit of brake cleaner to try and just gently clean this area a bit. And the installation is the opposite of removal, so we start with our new tensioner. I've applied some medium strength thread locker on the black bolt. This is an M10 bolt, and that will become relevant once we torque everything down. Just put it into its correct position and start tightening by hand. It goes in all the way. Next, we go underneath the car. We take the smaller bolt, which is an M8. Again, I applied medium strength thread locker. I'm able to insert the bolt by hand as well. Now the Haynes manual gives the torque for the small M8 bolt as 20 Newton meters or 15 pound-feet. That's it. And the top bolt, the M10 one, which uses an E14 Torx head, gets torqued to 55 Newton meters or 41 pound-feet. That's it. Let's move on to installing the belt. And here's the belt in position according to the schematic that we drew earlier. Right, so over the water pump, over the air conditioning compressor down to the crankshaft pulley, then goes over the tensioner and to the alternator. And the last thing that we need to do right now is to remove that pin that holds the tensioner in place. And similar to what we did when we removed the belt, we need to apply leverage in this direction, and that is clockwise, to slacken the tension a bit and be able to remove the pin. So I'm using a ratchet with an extension. Okay, here is the pin. And now as I'm slackening the tension in the ratchet, the tensioner picks up the tension on the belt. All right, belt is installed. And at this point, you want to make a visual check of each pulley to make sure that the belt doesn't skip any of the channels and that it's sitting properly. It is in our case. Now, ideally, this would be the point where I would like to start the engine and make sure that everything is fine. But obviously, in this particular case, I cannot, because number one, the air intake is blocked. And number two, I'm worried that attempting to start the engine would generate the vibrations from the starter, and those vibrations may be large enough to actually destabilize the jack underneath the engine. And I don't want to risk it. So instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a ratchet and turn the crankshaft pulley for a while to make sure that everything is fine. This is the next best thing in terms of testing. And again, using my ratchet with a Torx E18 head, I connect it to the crankshaft pulley bolt. And be mindful, right, that the effort as you spin is not going to be uniform, obviously, because you will be fighting the compression step on each cylinder. So you will feel progressively more effort, and then suddenly it slacks off. That's perfectly normal. Okay? And just do a couple of turns in the clockwise direction, making sure that there are no problems. And in our case, there are none, which is very good news. And it means it's time to put back our old friend, the bracket. Here is our beloved bracket, which I took the opportunity to clean a bit with a wire brush. And to insert it, again, we need to raise the engine as much as we can. And it goes something like this. You insert at the bottom, okay, and you hopefully you can see. So first is that leg at the bottom. Then once that gets in, you can push it a bit further, and then you slide to the left, jiggle a bit, and in it goes. And with the bracket in its roughly correct position, the first bolt that we need to install is number 8, which is the one at the bottom. Because if you remember, if we were to install the ones at the top, when we're gonna try and lower the engine to put number 8 back, we won't have room. So back to lowering the engine and putting bolt 8 in its correct position. So here is bolt number 8. Hopefully you can see it. With a bit of medium strength Loctite. The engine has been lowered as much as possible. And I'm able to screw the bolt in. Now I'm going to raise it a bit. That's enough. This gives me sufficient play in the available space to be able to further tighten the bolt by hand. Okay. And I won't torque it just yet. Now I'm going to raise the engine one more time to install the top bolts. And with the engine raised one more time, here is bolt number 7, which goes down there to the right. Okay, it's in. And the last one is bolt number 6, which is the left one. Again, with a little bit of medium strength thread locker. Here it is. And in it goes. Again, with some struggle, but it got in. Perfect. So all 3 bolts for the bracket are now in their correct positions. All that's left is to tighten them down a little bit. I'm gonna use my ratchet. Okay, that's one. That's 2. Now the tightening torque for these bolts is 60 Newton meters or 44 pound-feet. The Haynes manual does say that these bolts should normally not be reused, so you should get new ones if you can. I wasn't able to, and by the look of it, they are in pretty good shape anyway, so I will be reusing them. That is 1. That is 2. And with the topmost bolts torqued, let's lower the engine for the last time and torque the lower bolt as well. And again, 60 Newton meters. All right. Now let's raise the engine to its normal position so we can install the engine mount. Now with the engine mount, you have to be a bit careful, because what I found is if you first try and install these two bolts and then the last three, it is quite difficult to align the mount to the three holes and you're gonna struggle. A better solution is to first put the three bolts but not tightening them fully, which is what I'm doing now. This is number 1, which goes here. Just a few turns. Okay. This is number 3, which goes here. Again, just a couple of turns. And this is number 2, again with Loctite, a couple of turns. Okay, so the mount is in place, but it has some play. And now we bring the big bolts. This is number 4. Don't forget the washer. Again, just a small number of turns. And here is number 5 as well. All right, and now what we're gonna do, we're gonna raise the engine, tighten the 2 big bolts, and then we're gonna lower it, remove the jack, and tighten the last 3. Here we are. Engine is lifted. As you can see, the engine mount sits on the bracket and it's slightly raised from the chassis. Okay, see? Now, again, the Haynes manual says these should be replaced. And again, because I wasn't able to get a hold of 2 new ones, I won't replace them. Though I'm not worrying too much, because the Haynes manual requests the same replacement of bolts on the left side transmission mount, which I touched when I changed the transmission. And back then I also used the same bolts that I had, and it's been 2 years since then and I've had absolutely no problems whatsoever. Just tighten to the specified torque and we should be good. And using our E18 Torx head, we tighten the bracket bolts to 80 Newton meters or 59 pound-feet in stage 1. That's 1. And that is 2. And in stage 2, it says to tighten the 2 bolts a further 45 degrees each, which means that these are normally torque to yield bolts, which explains why they're asking us to replace them. Let's see. It's 45. And that's it for these 2 bolts. And now I'm just going to lower the jack and remove it and let the engine mount sit on the chassis. And then the remaining 3 bolts get tightened to 60 Newton meters or 44 pound-feet. These do not need replacing. That is 1. That is 2. And that is 3. So right now the engine's mounted in position, and we have to reinstall all the pipes related to the air intake. So let's start by connecting the intermediate tube to the throttle body. we take our tube, remove the covers, inspect the tube, making sure there are no obvious foreign debris inside. Remove the cover from the throttle body. And reconnect the two. And then take your 7mm hex and tighten the Jubilee clip. You definitely want to make sure that that Jubilee clip is properly tightened. You don't want to give any chance for outside air to get between the tube and the throttle body. All intake air should come from the air filter box, which we're going to install now. So first we remove the cover of the box. Next, do take note of the 3 connecting points. See if you can see them. Okay, that's the second and this is the third. Now, if you find that you don't have room to put the box back, as just happened to me, simply slacken off the Jubilee clip that you just tightened on that intermediate tube, and then you can push it to the side to make more room around here. And let's see if this helps. I managed to put this back in place. What tends to cause some annoyance is the connection between the box and the fresh air intake tube, which is down here. Oh, that's connected well. Next, let's remove the covers for the intermediate tube. Connect the tube to the air filter box. Gently push until it sits. Then you have the 2 clips, one here and the other one here, that you put back into position. That's 1 and that is 2. Okay. And now we have to tighten the 2 Jubilee clips, this here and the one we slackened off back there, to allow our tube to align with the box. No torque here, 7mm hex for both, but just bear in mind, don't over torque because that is plastic and it can crack. That is 1. And that is 2. Neither of them are moving anymore, which is what we want. Excellent. So now we can start the engine and see if we did a good job. And moment of truth, let's see what happens. So everything appears to be in order. Looking down there, though you can barely see it, the belt is fine, there are no weird noises. You can just barely see the alternator there. So everything seems okay. More importantly, there are no issues on the dashboard, which is the best we could have hoped for, really. And with all being well, I can now proceed to put that cover back using the 4 bolts in the clip that I've shown you when I removed it, and I'll do that off camera. And once the cover is installed and the 4 bolts are tightened, one there and one at the front, we only need to install this plastic clip, right? And this is why I said at the beginning you need to make sure you don't lose the pin, because the way these things get installed is you push the pin a little bit at the top, but not too much. You then insert the clip, okay, and then you push the pin until it sits flush with the face of the clip. And that is it. And now there's just one thing left, and that is to install the front right wheel. And once the wheel is installed and you've removed the jack and jack stands, etc., don't forget to torque the 4 nuts. The torque is 110 Newton meters, and you should torque in a cross pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And we are done, and we can take the car out for a test drive now. And after a successful test drive, it's time for the customary conclusions. Now, the first and foremost topic that I want to touch on is your safety. As you've seen in this job, it is one that requires a good amount of care, because in order to, at the very least, remove and replace just the belt, you need to take out the right-hand side engine mount, which means you need to support the engine on a jack, which obviously poses a number of risks. If you're tackling this job, pay very close attention to how stable the jack is and how well the engine is supported on it. I strongly recommend that you do not use bottle jacks and instead use some kind of scissor jack, because it is more stable and also allows for side-to-side motion of the engine without too many issues. Also, in principle, you do not really need to get under the engine for this job. You just have to jack it up and then work towards its side. And whatever you do, please first and foremost take care of yourself and do not expose yourself to any unnecessary risks. In a way, it is a pity that the mount is not designed in such a way that the belt goes fully under it, as is the case of the Sportage, but it is what it is. And while I'm on this topic, and I've already mentioned it, if you just remove and replace only the belt, you don't need to remove that second bracket as well, only the engine mount to gain access, which, at least in the engine on our Corsa, provides a little safety margin, because if the jack underneath the engine fails, then the engine will fall, but only to the point where the mount hits the chassis on its right hand side and then gets jammed there. So with this setup, at the very least, if the jack fails, the engine won't fall completely to the ground. If you have to replace the tensioner as well, then all bets are off. The bracket needs to come out as well, and that's the most dangerous phase of the operation. So again, please pay attention to what you're doing. Regarding the tools, ideally what would help the most are some thin wrenches with Torx E heads. If you don't have Torx E heads, you can use some thin wrenches with 12-point heads. As you've seen, a Torx E14 is fully compatible with a 11mm 12-point head. Part number 3, as you've seen, this belt in front of you is 9 years old. As I've explained, because it's EPDM, you will not see bits of it missing, and you're unlikely to see cracks, so don't look for cracks or bits missing as an indicator of the belt's age or wear level. Ideally, just change it as part of preventative maintenance, or if you start to hear any kind of squeaks or whatnot. Now, the tensioner itself is a fairly well-made component, but if you see signs of the bearing grease coming out, as is the case for the old part here in front of you, then that's a clear sign that it should be replaced. And lastly, let's touch costs. And this is going to be quite interesting because the cost in parts for me for the tensioner plus the belt was about 55 euros in total. You can go ahead and maybe round it up to 60, 70 euros if you want to take at least part of the cost of tools in the equation as well. Now, when I went to a Opel dealer and asked them for a quote, I was actually surprised by the amount they asked for, which was fairly close to 200 euros in total, nearly 3 to 4 times more. Granted, they do use genuine parts, but as you've seen here, the actual GM genuine part is made by Litton's, which you can also buy from any of the good quality aftermarket suppliers, as was INA in my case. And the belt that I went for is a Contitech or Continental as well, which is a very good brand, so I didn't skimp on the quality of the parts that I bought. I never really do that. There is a good cost saving to be made if you're doing this operation yourself, but again, first and foremost, your safety is the most important. And with that said, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please consider subscribing if you've enjoyed the video. I wish you all a very nice day, and I will see you all next time. Take care and goodbye.